Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body for the Monday, the 12th of August 2024. As is normal, I would like to introduce the top table for everyone. So I am Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the Local Review Body. To my left is Councillor Ian Massey, and to my right is Councillor Dave Cuthbert. We are, by requirement, all members of the Planning and Placemaking Committee. Indeed, Councillor Massey is the convener of the Planning and Placemaking Committee, so you get two for the price of one today, or double the trouble, perhaps, who knows. To my far right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney, who is an independent planning advisor. She has no previous involvement with any of these cases until they came forward for appeal. To my far left is Mr. Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor for today. And then finally, we have Kirsty at the end, who is from Democratic Services and whose surname I've forgotten, but there we are. Malloy, sorry, I beg your pardon. Members, second item on the agenda is any declarations of interest. Councillor Massey?
None.
And Councillor Cuthbert?
None.
Thank you. Third item on the agenda is the minute of the last meeting. As I was the only member present, obviously we change. I'm happy to approve the minutes as they stand. Members, that now leads us on to the cases for review today. So we'll start off here with the first one, which is number 4.1 on our agenda. This is the siting of an office, formation of hardstanding and associated works in retrospect at Glen Cottage, Glentarkey, Strathmiglo near Cooper, which I think is obviously just within our remit as Perthing and Ross. So Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce the case for us.
Thank you, convener. I'll just run through some of the slides to start with. So the application site highlighted there with the yellow star just in the top corner, so you can see approximate location related to Auchtermuchty and Strathmiglo there, and then the site as you head north up and over the hill there. Next slide, please. And then zooming in a little bit closer to the site, you'll see largely rural area, forested roundabout, and the dwelling house that is in the ownership of the applicant is just next to the star there as well. Next slide, please. And then coming in closer here, you'll see the application site is where the star is located, the dwelling house in the ownership of the applicant, and some stable buildings to the front there on the other side of the road. Next slide, please. These are some kind of aerial and long distance images. So the one on the left there is from the top of the hill looking south. So again, you can see the dwelling house, and the arrow shows the location of the building on the other side of the road. And then the bottom image there is looking to the north up the hill, with the dwelling house on one side of the road and the application site on the other where the arrow is. Next slide, please. These are the drawings of, or the site plans that were submitted with the application. So the red line, albeit faint there, is the outline of the application site, and then you can see the footprint of the proposed building. Next slide, please. And then this is the building itself. Composite cladding walls, largely flat roof, some glazed elements as well. Next slide, please. And then this is the floor plan. Very simple. It's an office, just one room with some sliding doors there. And then on the right hand side, the gate, which leads from across the road from the house into where the office is located. Next slide, please. These are some photographs now. So this is looking from the dwelling house on the other side of the road across to where the building's located. It is an application in retrospect, so the building is already in situ. And then this is the gate that leads through on the other side of the road as well. Next slide, please. And then this is looking south down the road, which leads you back down towards Strathmiglo. The building's on the right hand side, albeit it's behind some vegetation at the moment, but you can see the gate. Next slide, please. And then this is looking directly into where the building is. You can just see on the right-hand side there the little path that takes you to where the pedestrian gate to the building is. Next slide, please. And then this is as you look north, so a bit more visible in terms of the building. There is an existing vehicular access in off the road, although that does not form part of the application proposal itself. That access is proposed or has always been there historically as part of just an access into the wooded area. Next slide, please. And again, slightly closer, just coming into where the building's located. Next slide. And then this is looking south from in front of the building, just at that access point off the road. Next slide, please. And this is looking from within the application site, the far side of the building, looking towards the pedestrian gate, towards the road. And again, just as you come round the back of the building. And then this is looking along the rear elevation. So most of the glazing on the building is on the side of the building facing away from the road. Next slide, please. Again, you can see the rest of the rear of the building here and some of the kind of external hard landscaping and lighting that's been put in. Next slide. This is the woodland area in the ownership of the applicant, just to the rear of the building. You probably see just in the distance there, there's a little kind of caravan there on the left-hand side. I'll refer to that in a second. And then again, just an image there to the rear of the building looking into the trees. And then just looking in the opposite direction along the rear of the building. These images are of the building that previously occupied the site, effectively a timber double garage, which, as you can see, was probably in a fairly dilapidated state. Ordnance survey map there from 1959 that the applicant provided, which shows that building has been there since that time, and it was still there when the current applicant took over the property about 18 months ago. So just to introduce and give some background to the appeal, Glen Cottage is situated in a rural location in Glentarkey. The application site lies across the road from the house on grazing land, which is also within an area of ancient woodland, which forms a backdrop to the development, along with mature landscaping along the public boundaries of the property, and which provide a strong sense of containment to the domestic curtilage. The site is located within the Oakhill Hills local landscape area. The application seeks permission for the siting of an office, formation of hard standing and associated works to be used for home office use and not commercial purposes. It measures 7.15 metres by 4.65 metres and is 2.35 metres high. It is of a modern design and construction, made from composite cladding with a projecting roof and decking, and with glazing which faces into the trees away from the road. The new pedestrian access and gate is metal framed and styled to match the office. The area has been hard landscaped and has low level lighting. Whisky barrels are placed around the outside of the building away from the road. There is an existing vehicular access into the site, which has presumably been in place for some time, given there was a dilapidated timber storage structure on the site previously, and which the new office is built on the location of. This appears to have been used for maintenance of the adjacent land and was described as being a garage barn associated with the grazing land in the particulars when the property was sold around 18 months ago. The LRB should be aware of two separate applications on neighbouring ground, again made by the applicant for holiday let purposes. One is for the retention of the caravan on the site, which you saw there in one of the photographs, for a temporary period, and the other is for the erection of a permanent 2-bedroom holiday let cottage. At this moment in time, the applications are both still pending with no decision yet made by the planning service. In terms of this application, the reasons for refusal are firstly that the development, by virtue of its inappropriate design, materials, colour, finishes and prominent position, results in an incongruous and jarring appearance and an adverse impact upon the character and amenity of its countryside location. Refusal would therefore be in line with Policy 14C of MPF4, which states that development proposals that are poorly designed and detrimental to the amenity of the surrounding area will not be supported. Furthermore, approval would be contrary to Perth and Kinross Council's Placemaking Guide 2020, Policies 1A and 1B (C) of Perth and Kinross LDP2, and Policies 14A and B of MPF4, which seek to ensure that development contributes positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment in terms of appearance, design, materials, colour, finishes and position in order to respect the character and amenity of the place. And secondly, that the development, by virtue of its inappropriate design, materials, colour, finishes and prominent position, results in an incongruous and jarring appearance and a detrimental impact upon the character and amenity of its location within the Oak Hill Hills local landscape area. Approval would therefore be contrary to Policy 4A and D of MPF4, Policy 39 A, B and C of Perth and Kinross LDP2, and Perth and Kinross Council Landscape Supplementary Guidance 2020, which seek to protect the sensitive nature of the landscape designation by ensuring that development respects the distinctive, wild and tranquil nature of the area and safeguards the scenic quality of the landscape. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, it's considered that in terms of visual amenity and landscape impact, the exposed roadside location of the site makes it sensitive to change. The proposed development has introduced a domesticated appearance into the land with the siting of an office which has the stark and incongruous appearance of a shipping container, a pedestrian access gate matching the gates in the domestic curtilage opposite, low-level lighting and decorative aggregates surrounding it. Therefore, the development, by virtue of its inappropriate design, materials, colour, finishes and prominent position, results in an incongruous and jarring appearance. It significantly alters the character of the area by introducing domesticated and urbanising features into a relatively unspoiled area of grazing land and ancient woodland. It is also highly visible from the public road, and it results in a detrimental impact upon the character and amenity of its countryside location. And it has an unacceptable adverse impact upon the scenic qualities of the local landscape area. In terms of the case made by the applicant, it is highlighted that the site was occupied by a dilapidated and unusable garage at the time they took ownership in 2023, and it is understood the garage has been on the site since 1959. With regard to the first reason for refusal, the applicant considers that the building is well integrated into the surrounding woodland setting. This type of building is commonly associated with and considered acceptable in rural areas. The site is not prominent, being only partially glimpsed on passing along the road immediately adjacent to the site. The proposal replaces a dilapidated building, providing improvements to the site. They have said they would be happy to clad the building in timber, which would match the caravan and the proposed holiday accommodation. With regard to the second reason for refusal, the applicant believes that the assessment does not use any understanding of the attributes of the local landscape area, and that such a small-scale proposal for a home office replacing a former derelict garage and shed will have no impact on the special character or qualities of the Oak Hill Hills landscape area. Scenic qualities is only one of 10 criteria relating to the identification of landscape areas. Another is that they are well managed and in a good state of repair. The special qualities of the Oak Hill Hills do not include any reference to scenic qualities, unlike, for example, Upper Strathearn, and forces for change include forestry expansion or forestry and native woodland and wind turbine development, pylons, solar farms, and other infrastructure. The objectives for the area are for the expansion and management of native woodland, ensuring that proposals for mass turbines and solar farms have no adverse impact, preserving historical landscapes and maintaining the character of vernacular buildings and settlements across the hills. These qualities and the character of the LLA will not be adversely impacted by this small-scale proposal. In terms of other matters, the Council's Transport Officer has concluded that the development does not have an adverse impact upon road traffic safety, and although there is an existing double-width agricultural field access, the proposal does not include any proposed vehicular access. And in terms of natural heritage and biodiversity, although the development is located within the ancient woodland, it has no direct effect upon adjacent trees. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We've got the questions. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
I have no question.
And Councillor Massey?
Yes, thank you. I have one question. You mentioned the size of the structure now. Is that greater or larger than the structure that was there, the garage, the garage and shed?
Thank you. I can't confirm exactly because obviously that building, we've only got photographs of it. We don't have any measurements, but by my reckoning, I would say they're very similar in size. What is proposed or exists now is possibly slightly larger, but I can't confirm for absolute sure.
Thanks. Just a couple of points. When you were there, the road itself, would you consider it as a busy road, or is it an access road of some sort?
On this side of the hill, I didn't think it was a particularly busy road at all. On the other side of the hill, where there are more properties coming back down towards Perth, I would say it was slightly busier, but no more or less so than a normal country road.
And just the other point is, we keep calling it as an office, but they do mention there's no commercial element there. And I just wondered, when you were there, was there any discussion about what it's actually going to be used for? So 1 minute it's the office, then it's not commercial.
I mean, it is an office, but it's purely for their own purposes, working from home. It's not for a business of any sort where there would be comings and goings from members of the public, for example.
Fine, thank you very much. So with no further questions, members, are we now able to proceed to review this application on the basis of information before us, that is information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Cuthbert?
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Massey?
Happy to proceed.
I'm happy to proceed. So Councillor Cuthbert, if you could start us on this one.
Yes, thank you, convener. I popped out to have a look at the site. I would say that the road is actually very quiet. Certainly when I was there, I didn't see any cars. I was there for about 20 minutes. To begin with, I had difficulty finding the building because it's quite difficult to see from the road. So my view is that it actually fits into the countryside really well as it is, and I can't see any reason for refusing it. So I would support the appeal. There was a question of whether it should be clad in timber or not. I'll let other people work out whether they want that. But in principle, I thought it made it blend with the background very well indeed.
And Councillor Massey?
I echo what Councillor Cuthbert said, and I'd be minded to grant.
Thank you both. I think I'm going to concur with the decision on this one. The officer obviously has raised valid points in his notice of refusal, but I think there are circumstances here which we could would give reason to move away from the development plan. I think obviously the fact that the road is quite quiet, it's unlikely to see a lot of tourist traffic. So I think this is a road that's used by people who actually live there or visiting people who live there. Obviously, we've removed a dilapidated, falling down building and replaced it with something more modern, which I think is also a valid point, which can be used. And it is not that visible when you're driving along the road. So I too am prepared to grant the appeal. My question is, on the question of timber cladding, I would think it would help to blend the building in, but I'm interested in what my two colleagues would think about that. So, Councillor Massey, let you start first.
I would be in agreement with that. I think the applicant have said that they're willing to do this. So if it's possible to add that to the permissions, then I'm quite happy to go ahead with that.
Any thoughts on that, Councillor Cuthbert? Just go along.
I'm relaxed about it, as I said. I think it'll stand out more to begin with, but then it'll blend in better later on.
Okay, so Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to grant the appeal with that condition for the timber cladding.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Just to be clear, you said something that kind of sparked a thought in my head, but what I have is you've got grant subject to suitable terms, conditions and informatives. So one of the conditions will be requiring it to be timber clad, but if I heard two members, but not you, Convener, it was quite clear it simply came across as being according with policy. You said something that kind of caused doubt in my mind, but as you were talking about departing with policy, but my understanding is at least two members saying that it accords with policy.
Yes, what I was trying to say was the fact that the officer made obviously made his decision, but I felt there were other circumstances which made it worth reviewing it and granting the appeal.
Yes, but still, in you.
So, yes,
Policy,
sorry, yes,
you know, because you're all being very clear that it's
Yeah.
not particularly prominent and visible,
No,
and it fits the
correct.
location, so that seems to accord with policy.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to item 4.2, and that is the change of use of flat to short-term let accommodation unit in retrospect again at 40 Low Road, Perth. So Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce this one for us.
Thank you, convener. Again, we'll just go through a quick presentation. So the application site is highlighted here where the yellow star is. So you can see it's on Low Road up towards where Craigie Hill Golf Club is, Cherrybank Inn to the west, and Glasgow Road there to the north. Next slide, please. And zooming closer in, you can see the application site highlighted there with a star, row of kind of tenement buildings there, and then an open green area moving along towards where the Cherrybank Inn is and Glasgow Road to the north. Next slide, please. The red line application site that was submitted with the application, so it simply draws a line around the pedestrian access into the front of the property, the floor plan of the property, and around the stairwell which runs up the back of the property to this and other flats in the building. And then a floor plan there which shows the one bedroom, living room, kitchen and bathroom. Next slide, please. So this is as you look along Low Road towards the east, and you can see the yellow square there goes around the two windows. So it's first floor flat in the middle of a block of 6. Next slide, please. And then again, this is just looking a little bit further up Low Road from the appeal site. And then this is looking in the opposite direction now towards the west and towards Cherrybank Inn. And again, you can see the appeal site highlighted there within the yellow square. This is a duplicate. You can see the available on-street parking as well. And again, just looking closely at the front of the property, the two windows that face onto Low Road. And again, you can see the windows there. This is around the rear of the property. So again, you can see the communal stairwell in the middle, and then the window of the flat to the right-hand side. Next slide, please. This is the kind of open green space to the side of where the tenements are, looking up towards the golf course. Next slide. This is the general surrounding area as you head along towards Glasgow Road now past the Cherrybank Inn, some more modern flatted properties there. And again, you can see those flats there, and then more cars parked in this area on the street there. And then this is looking from the Cherrybank Inn back down towards the appeal site, which is kind of hidden by the trees, but the arrow shows where it is. And again, this is from coming up onto Glasgow Road. So you can see the Cherrybank Inn, the parking, and where the appeal site is, where the arrow indicates. This is the internal tenement stairwell area. So this is the ground floor looking towards the stairs that take you upstairs. Next slide, please. This is the door that takes you in off the street to all the flats in the building. A garden area, which is around the back of the property, although none of that is shown on the drawings as part of the ownership of the applicant or part of the proposal. And again, and then this is looking back from inside the building towards the communal door to the street. These are the doors to the 2 first floor flats. So one on the left there is the neighbouring flat. The one on the right is the front door to the appeal site. And again, and with also a small door there, presumably storage cupboard or something. It's not actually included in the drawings, but it very much looks just like a small storage area. And again, you can see the stairs going upstairs to the top floor. So the application is for the retrospective change of use of a first floor 1-bedroom flat to short-term let accommodation in a 3-storey tenement block on Low Road, which comprises 6 flats. Access to the flat is via a pend and turnpike staircase at the rear of the building. The reason for refusal states that the proposal is contrary to NPF 4 policies 14C, design quality in place, and 30E1, tourism, and Perth and Kinross LDP 2, policies 1A, placemaking, and policy 17D, residential areas, as the short-term let accommodation adversely impacts on the amenity of neighbouring residents, and the short-term let use is not compatible with the amenity and character of the surrounding predominantly residential area. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, specifically NPF 4 Policy 30E, tourism, states that development proposals for the reuse of existing buildings for short-term holiday letting will not be supported where the proposal will result in, firstly, an unacceptable impact on local amenity or the character of a neighbourhood or area, or secondly, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. In respect of the first criteria, the proposed use of the property as a short-term let is not significantly different from a flat in terms of its physical appearance, the extent of guest footfall or noise emanating from the property, so long as good management practices are in place. However, the high turnover of guests, both to date and in future, is likely higher than typical private rented or owner-occupied accommodation, and this can have an impact on noise and disturbance to neighbours. Whereas such impacts may be offset in town centre or mixed-use areas, the same cannot be said in a predominantly residential area such as this. It is acknowledged that the Cherrybank Inn public house is located further west along Low Road and that the Craigiehill Golf Club occupies Greenbelt land to the south. However, the eastern part of Low Road, as it rises to the junction with Glasgow Road, is almost exclusively comprised of residences. In respect of the second criteria, the proposal has resulted in the loss of a flat to short-term let accommodation in an urban location. It is also acknowledged that the Council's housing strategy have undertaken consultation in respect of the introduction of a short-term let control area. However, no such area has yet been formally designated. It is also acknowledged that economic benefits can derive from small-scale short-term let accommodation, which provides access to a range of attractions and activities for business and leisure guests alike. As such, the loss of this 1-bedroom flat in Perth to short-term let accommodation does not have a significant impact on the availability of residential accommodation in the local area. In terms of NPF 4 Policy 14, Design Quality in Place, and LDP 2 Policies 1A, Placemaking, and 17 Residential Areas, these support proposals including business and tourism, which are compatible with the amenity and character of the surrounding area, and consistent with the 6 qualities of successful places. It is acknowledged that short-term lets can result in additional levels of disturbance and noise concerns, and that the primary avenue to regulate such matters is via the separate licensing regime. Non-statutory planning guidance for the change of use of residential property to short-term let guidance has been adopted. This acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact the loss of that property has on the availability of housing for local people, affordable housing in particular, and the potential for adverse impacts on residential amenity, where an increased proportion of the housing stock becomes short-term lets. 6 considerations are outlined in the guidance. These include location, larger residential properties, refurbishment of long-term empty properties, local amenity and character, business diversification, and the relationship between loss of residential accommodation and local economic benefits. The location consideration contains reference to 3 area types: city and town centres, mixed-use areas within settlements, and predominantly residential areas. In this instance, the application site is within a predominantly residential area in Perth. The effect of the proposal on local amenity and character should therefore be considered. In the absence of the formal designation of a short-term let control area, the proposed loss of the residence is not considered detrimental to housing availability. However, the proposal raises concerns in terms of residential amenity and its effect on the character of a predominantly residential area. In terms of the applicant's case, they fully respect the importance of the planning process and the Council's commitment to maintaining the integrity of our community. However, they believe that there are reasons to reconsider the refusal. The property was a rundown tenement and has been renovated to a high-end 1-bed STL property. It has been operating since June 2021 and is managed by the applicant, who personally meets and greets all guests, many of whom choose this property as they didn't want to be in the town centre. Guests like that it is a quiet area with off-street parking. Locals stay here if they have been flooded and want to stay locally, but not in the city centre, and people use it when members of their family are in hospital. There are no other STLs in the street. They have repeat customers who use the local restaurants and golf course, and they feel it's unfair as there was a property at 20C Needless Road, which was given permission a few hundred yards away, which had 4 objections from all neighbours in the close. In this case, there are no objections from any of the neighbours, and the applicant has a good relationship with them. Cherrybank is a mix of residential properties with commercial properties like the dental practice, nursery, hairdressing salon, beauty room, golf course, and the Cherrybank Inn and Garage. In terms of other matters, the proposals raise no access or parking concerns, as on-street parking is available nearby and there are bus stops on Glasgow Road. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to questions. Councillor Cuthbert
I don't have any.
and Councillor Massey.
None from me.
And I too have done on this occasion. So members that make that piece of paper. Are we able to proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, information contained in the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Cuthbert
I'm happy to proceed.
and Councillor Massey.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this one. And I'll start us off on this occasion. Short-term lets, the core of all of these is the same, as particularly in flats, is the effect on residential amenity in the area. In this instance, again, we have a communal entrance, and I think it's important to recognise the intensification of movement of people within a short-term let processes. This is a matter which has been brought up before us before, and as a result of an appeal to the DPAA regarding a property in Burnham. The concern is obviously that the movement of people is far greater than what would normally be with a short-term let, with a short-term tenancy, and this is always a problem how it affects the amenity of people around, both in the apartments block itself and obviously the properties around. And I know parking there is tricky as well. Taking that all into account, it is my thought, and I appreciate that Cherrybank Inn is nearby, but this part of the road is predominantly residential. And my thoughts are, as before with these sort of cases, is to refuse the appeal on the basis that it will affect the residential amenity in the area, and therefore I would concur with the comments made by the planning officer in declining this case. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Well, guess what? I'm going to go with the other direction on this one. I visited the site, and whilst I appreciate the area is residential, there are commercial properties like the Cherrybank Inn and the garage nearby. So I'm off the view that the area is not fully residential. So it's down one step, if you like. I'm also aware that the property is a one-bedroom flat, and what that does is it precludes the larger parties, which causes a lot of the problems with the short-term lets. So in principle, my recommendation is to approve the appeal.
Thank you. So Councillor Massey, it's on your head, this one.
Well, thank you for that. Well, I'm in concurrence with Councillor Cuthbert. The property has been running since 2021, 3 years, never had any complaints. There was no objections to the proposal. I believe it doesn't have an unacceptable impact on the local amenity or character of the neighbourhood or area. And I also believe that the economic benefit from someone staying there outweighs the residential accommodation. In other words, policy 30E2. So I would also approve the application.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a majority decision on this one, a 2-1 decision to go ahead and grant the appeal.
Yes, convener. Give me a second to be grant subject to suitable terms, and there may be a contribution to pay, conditions and informatives on the basis that the majority consider that there is no significant impact on the character and amenity of the area. In other words, it accords with policy. Yes.
Thank you, members. So we'll now move on to item 4.3. This is the installation of replacement windows and door and installation of gas meter in Park Retrospect, 31 James Street in Perth. And Mrs. Tierney, if you could start off for us.
Thank you, convener. I'll just run through some slides first. So yeah, appeal site here on James Street in the centre of Perth. The location highlighted there with the yellow star. So you can see it's just very close to the railway line there, just to the south of the site. Next slide, please. And then as you zoom in, again, you can see residential properties in the area and then the railway line to the south there. These are the plans that were submitted with the application. So the red line is the site plan, the existing site plan of the existing house. You can see large footprint of the dwelling house, garden area to the front facing James Street. Next slide, please. And then we've got some floor plans which show the existing floor plans, ground floor and first floor. The blue, you can't make it out, but I'll come to it in a minute. They show the existing window openings as they are. Next slide, please. And then again, this is the as existing, or in this case, as was previously, because we are looking at an application in retrospect here. These are the elevations of the property along the top there, which show the windows that did exist in the property previously, and then the specific window types shown there on the bottom of the slide. I can come to those in a bit more detail in a second. And again, this would be the proposed floor plans. So again, what is highlighted in blue there is the same as the previous drawing, with all the windows detailed for each individual opening. Next slide, please. This is what's been installed in the property. So the proposed elevations. So the one on the top there is the front elevation facing James Street. So you can see instead of what existed before, which was the multi-pane traditional sash and case windows, we've got an upper and a lower sash without the split panes on the bottom and in the dormers on the roof as well. And then on this image, you can see there was a previous roof light in the middle of the roof, and that has been replaced, and 2 additional roof lights have been put in either side in between that and the 2 dormers on the front elevation. And then the side elevations and the rear elevation at the bottom show again the windows which have gone into the property, and also at this moment in time, because works were stopped, the remaining works which the applicant would still like to carry out to the property, including the removal of 1 window on the south elevation to create a French door into the very small courtyard garden area at the rear. And on the other side of the property, on the north elevation, you'll see another door there, which was a door previously, with a fan light which has been removed, and the proposed replacement door, which in this case has already been installed, as have the majority of the windows at the property. Next slide. And these are the images of each individual window, so you can see a huge range of window types and sizes of openings across the building, including the French doors and the other door as well to the rear. Next slide, please. So some images of the property. Because this is an application in retrospect, the windows which you see are the new windows. The previous windows have already been removed. You'll see the ground floor windows there, and then the 2 in the dormers above. Those are what's been installed are timber sash and case windows, and they do slide, but obviously they're quite different from the windows which were originally in the property previously. And you can see the roof lights in the roof. The roof light in the middle, there was one there previously, which we're led to believe was not would have been an original small skylight. What's been replaced there is not what you would call a conservation skylight, so it's not flush with the roof. It does protrude from the roof plane, and the 2 new roof lights which have been put in either side simply just match the one that's been put in the middle. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an impression now as you look up the street. There are other properties, 4 other dwelling houses as you head up to the junction. Next slide, please. And then this is looking from the junction back down to the property, which you just see at the end of the slide there on the left. Slightly closer up view of the front of the house. Next slide, please. And again, just a bit more closely. I think there are, next slide, please, Audrey. I think there's a couple of other drawings. So one of the points that's been raised as well is that the windows have these horn features, which are the 2 protrusions on the upper sash, which sits forward of the lower sash. The original windows didn't have that feature on them. However, and I'll come to it in some of the other photos, there is a range of types of windows in this area, including sash and case windows with and without these horn features on them. Next slide, please. Sorry, here we go. Slightly closer up image of the 2 windows on the ground floor, the front elevation. Next slide, please. This is a view around the side of the property. The boundary of the property is the wall. Just so you can see the side of the house, and one of the windows there just on that side wall. Next slide, please, which is this one here. Next slide, please. And then as you move round to the back of the property, the kind of courtyard area on that elevation. Next slide, please. So the window on the bottom there is the one I referred to, which is the one remaining original window, which hasn't been removed. And the proposal is that that becomes the French doors out into that small courtyard. The picture on the right is internally, that is the open plan kitchen area. And you see that kind of boarded up areas where the French doors would come out there into the courtyard. Next slide, please. And then this is around the other side of the property. Again, a very narrow gap between the end of the house and the mutual boundary wall with the neighbouring property. Next slide, please. And then as you come round, the kind of outbuilding at the back there, and a couple of the smaller windows and the small dormer there at the top. And one of the rear windows into that courtyard as installed, and then we have the other door, which was the more traditional door on the property, which has been replaced with this more modern replacement and a bit of infilling there, which has gone in. And some of the comments from the planning service are about the what has now gone in is not symmetrical or traditional in form. Next slide, please. Again, just closer ups of some of these windows around the rear. Next slide. And then these are some of the neighbouring properties. So this is immediately next door to the appeal site. Looks like those windows have been replaced at some point. I can't tell you whether that building is listed or not, but obviously it is in the conservation area as with the current application site. Next slide, please. Semi-detached properties here. One on the left has definitely had replacement windows fitted, whether that was with or without permission. I'm afraid I can't tell you that. But those are definitely not the original windows. The one on the right is possibly the original windows, or they certainly appear to have a more traditional form, being sliding sashes with astragals as well. Next slide, please. And then a larger property at the end of the street. In my mind, I think these probably are the original windows. And while they don't have astragals, they do appear to be sliding sash and case. And those do have the small horn features that I pointed out before. Next slide, please. And then this is on the other side of the street. So some renovation work being done to this property. Again, I can't tell you which ones are listed, but they're certainly all in the conservation area. Next slide, please. A more traditional window approach, probably original windows again, because they look like the original sliding sash and case units, timber. Next slide, please. And then some other ones, which again, you can see on the left there, look like the original windows because they have the 12 pane split with the astragals. The image on the right there, clearly a property that's, again, whether it was with or without permission, replaced its windows with what you would probably describe as a less sympathetic approach even to the current appeal site. Next slide, please. So by way of introduction, 31 James Street is a detached Category C listed cottage located within Perth Central Conservation Area. The application seeks permission for various alterations to the property, and obviously some of that, some of the works are unauthorised. They've been carried out without consent. So what we're looking at is in retrospect. There is a related application for listed building consent, which was submitted at the same time as this application. There is an appeal for that as well. That appeal as a listed building consent is with the Scottish Government, the DPEA. At the moment, we don't have the outcome of that appeal. It may have even been published in the last hour, but we don't know the outcome of that appeal yet. And I think that is an important consideration for you, by all means I can carry on at this stage, but you may want to consider that, convener.
Yes, I did. In the past, when we had this situation, we've tended to defer the case. As you mentioned, listed building consent is a factor. We don't know the answer to that yet, and I would be inclined to think about deferring this until we do get the result of the appeal, which could be any time, as you say. I think that the 26th of August was the date they've indicated, but of course it could be before that. So I'd like to ask my colleagues if they're happy to consider deferring this. Councillor Massey, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would already wrote that think it should be deferred until the outcome of the DPA appeal is known to us.
And Councillor Cuthbert?
I would concur, yeah.
Okay, so I think in this case, Mr. Elliott, we're going to recommend deferral. Deferral to wait for the result of the listed building consent appeal, and then allow that to be passed back to the development management team to make their comment, and obviously then for the applicant to make his comment as well, her comment as well.
Yes.
So I think that's a decision at the moment.
Yes, perhaps not just defer for the outcome, but actually defer for a copy of the decision. Not just be told yes or no, but actually to see a copy of the decision. So defer for the decision on the LBC appeal, which I think is 24-00094 LBC is the planning reference for it. And then thereafter for with Development Management Service and the applicant to comment on that decision before then bringing it back to yourselves. Okay.
Thank you very much. So we're deferring the case at the moment. Okay, and that decision. Members, thank you very much. We'll now move on to the next application before us this afternoon, sorry. This is number 5.1. Erection of dwelling house, land 20 metres southwest of 4 Lagionan Road at Grantley, Aberfeldy. Got it right this time. So Mrs. Tierney, would you like to introduce that for us?
Yes, thank you, convener. I think given some of the members present today are different to those who were present at the last meeting, I'll just go through the presentation and the case again, and then provide you with that extra information which has been received and commented on since the deferral. We'll just run through the slides to start with. So the application site, Grantley there, on the road to Aberfeldy, application site denoted where the yellow star is. Next slide, please. And then kind of zooming in, just obviously a number of properties in Grantley itself. I wrote properties here along the road, and the application site there, just that kind of open area to the west side of the row of cottages there between them and those trees. Next slide, please. So application site is highlighted there with the red line around the site boundary. You can see the other properties next door. The larger property to the top side there, highlighted in yellow, is the house that was granted permission a few years ago on appeal, and which is referred to by the applicant. We'll maybe come back to that. Next slide, please. This is quite an important slide in terms of the policy situation. This shows the settlement boundary around Grantley, the black line, and as you can see where the arrow points is the application site, which as you can see falls out with the settlement boundary just on the other side of it there. Next slide, please. Some of the detailed drawings that were submitted with the application. So this is the red line site boundary, the access of the road, the position of the dwelling house in the centre of the site there, the purple lines showing the contours across the site, rising up there to the west, and the trees both within the application site and on the other side of the application site. Next slide, please. Some elevational drawings of the proposed dwelling house. Small property, 2 bedrooms, single story, monopitch roof, glazing, so on. Next slide, please. And again, this is just to give you an impression of the levels across the site. So obviously the site is sloping and will require some levelling to create the flat area to locate the house on. And the bottom image there is the existing cottages along the road. So in terms of the street scene, what you will see includes the front elevation of the house there on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. So this is the view along to from the application site down to the main road, the Aberfeldy Road, traffic lights at the end there, tree plantation on the top side. Next slide, please. And as you continue away from the road, away from the site, again, the site can be accessed from either side here. Next slide, please. So looking back from the main road towards the row of cottages, and the arrow indicates the access point into the application site. Next slide, please. And then looking back towards the main road from the cottages, you can see the site rises up there to where some of those existing trees are, both within the application site and on the other side of it. Next slide, please. And then the house would be located in the middle of the site there where the arrow is. The frontage of the site is along the roadside there where that red line just runs along the edge of the road. Next slide, please. And again, this is now looking back a bit more closely at the site next to the cottages and the access point shown where the red line comes in off the road there. Next slide, please. This is looking directly into the site, so you can probably get a bit of an impression now of the rise in the level from the neighbouring cottage boundary up towards the trees. Next slide, please. And then this is looking from within the application site now back towards the road into the site, down towards the boundary with the neighbouring property. Next slide, please. And then again, slightly higher up from within the site near the trees, looking back towards the cottages to the east. Next slide, please. And then from the application site, just in the distance there, you can see another large dwelling house, which is the one I highlighted earlier on in yellow that was the subject of that appeal some years ago. Next slide, please. So in terms of introduction and background, the proposals for a house located to the west of a row of houses, which are 2 sets of semi-detached cottages in Grantley. While the houses are within the settlement boundary, the appeal site is out with the settlement boundary. The site slopes from east, nearest to the houses, to the west towards the woodland. As such, the site requires some cutting to provide a level construction area for the house. The proposed house is a modest single-storey house of modern design with a monopitch roof finished in profile sheeting and timber walls. The access to the site can be from the east or the west. There is a plantation tree belt to the west of the site, and only the closest of these would appear to be potentially impacted by the development. In terms of reasons for refusal, firstly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 6 of the Perth and Kinross LDP, as the site adjoins the settlement boundary, and that no justification has been provided in relation to the proposal to meet the exceptions in the policy. The policy seeks to prevent the unplanned and ad hoc expansion of those settlements which have a boundary identified in the LDP. Secondly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 9B, brownfield, vacant and derelict land and empty buildings of MPF 4, as the proposal is on a greenfield site, but the site is not an allocated site and the development proposed is not explicitly supported by policies in the LDP. Thirdly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 17, rural homes of MPF 4, as the proposal fails to meet any of the specific circumstances listed. And finally, the proposal is contrary to Policy 6 of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2 and Policy 6, forestry, woodland and trees of MPF 4, as the submission fails to consider the impact of the development in relation to trees. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the site is considered under Policy 6 settlement boundaries of the LDP, not the housing countryside housing policy. Comparison cannot be drawn to a site to the north granted on appeal in 2007. Although the reporter considered that site to be well contained and had a good visual relationship with the settlement, this decision was 17 years ago, and plans and policies have changed, and the site is also quite different. Policy 6 requires that development should be contained within settlement boundaries, and if a development adjoins a boundary, it should be in accordance with Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, be justifiable on the basis of a specific operational and locational need, and it can be demonstrated that there are no suitable sites available within the settlement, be required to address a shortfall in housing land supply, and will not result in adverse effects either individually or in combination on the integrity of a European protected site, and no such justification has been submitted. NPF 4 Policy 17 Rural Homes noted criteria which would allow for the development of houses out with settlement boundaries, and it does not comply with any of these clauses. There are no significant concerns in terms of design and layout. However, the access and cutting in to create a level surface for the house creates some concern in terms of impact on trees. The proximity of the trees to the house is of some concern, as it's likely that the closeness may result in the occupier wishing to remove trees or to avoid wind damage impact. The impact of the proposed fence at the access would need to be further clarified to ensure the required visibility can be provided. In terms of the applicant's case, reference is made to a nearby historic appeal decision for a house, and that this is similar and should take precedence over current policy. It is stated that the appeal noted that the site felt like part of the village. It is claimed that the site is well contained and that a modestly scaled house in this location will not have any adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. The scale and design of the house with external timber cladding will help blend the development into the existing woodland setting and is complementary to the existing cottages, and as such it will not have an overbearing effect on them in accordance with the placemaking policy. There will be no loss of any significant mature trees, only 2 Category C trees to accommodate the development and 5 Category U trees for safety. There will be no loss of habitat, and the plans show the visibility is acceptable. There were no objections or concerns from other consultees or members of the public. So in terms of the information following deferral, on the 13th of May, Development Management reviewed and commented on the tree survey, arboricultural impact assessment, tree protection and compensatory planting plan, which was attached to the applicant's notice of review. And the tree report demonstrates that the development can be undertaken with tree protection in place using specific techniques with a small amount of tree removal. The tree report, however, doesn't detail the impact on amenity of future occupants of living on a site which abuts a tall woodland plantation. In these instances, they have often found that there is a perception from occupants of the dangers of living with tall trees in close proximity, and they often cite danger of falling trees, overshadowing, etc., in looking to remove nearby trees. Transport planning commented on the visibility, and the applicant has provided a visibility display of 25 metres to the left and right of the access, suitable for a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. To the northeast of the access, there is a 2-metre high fence, which the applicant has confirmed will be reduced in height. And a condition is recommended for the fence to be reduced in height and to ensure that the height of the fence is reduced and maintained as such. In response to these comments, the agent has also commented that the comments from roads are welcome, but questions the amenity of residents referred to by the planning officer. The agent has reiterated that the visual appearance of the dwelling is simple and is closely bounded by nature. The proposed dwelling and open garden areas lie to the east of the existing trees, ensuring available sunlight would be received from morning through to late afternoon. The proposed solar PV panels would harvest that natural energy. In winter, this would be less so. However, the limited prevalence of winter sun would be a less significant loss of amenity. The amenity of mature woodland on the doorstep would significantly outweigh this, with the land sloping upward from the proposed dwelling through the plot and on into the adjacent and much larger tree-covered land. The trees on the applicant's plot, especially those adjacent to the proposed dwelling, would be sheltered from winds that might cause loss of trees towards the dwelling. However, it would be prudent to provide an action plan as part of the construction handover, requiring annual inspection of the trees by a suitably qualified tree surgeon, confirming the health or otherwise of the trees on the plot. Occasional removal and compensatory planting of Category 2 trees would do no worse than replicate the process of nature. In conclusion, it is stated that this modern, simple, modest dwelling was conceived to blend with the wooded surroundings, to be amongst the trees, not keeping them at bay with a sterilised safe zone. The applicant believes this to be an environmentally positive approach and is hopeful that potential future actions or future custodians would not prevent the positive intentions. Thank you.
Thank you. Move to questions. Councillor Massey.
Yes, you mentioned about the trees, policy 40 woodland trees. Is that that's part of the reasons for refusal? Does that mean that that's no longer part of the reason for refusal?
Sorry, I think what the planning service is saying is that they're accepting the findings of the tree information. It's just that what they're also saying is, notwithstanding that, there can be further pressure to remove other trees by other people who may not be the current applicants in the future.
I have no questions.
I just have one. We talked about an action plan for future review of the trees. Can that be conditioned? Might be Mr. Ray, I'm not sure.
Yes, convener, that could be
It
conditioned.
Can be a condition, yeah. Okay. Okay, as we have no further questions, members, are we now in a position to determine the application for review on the basis of the information put before us? That is, the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Massey
Happy to proceed.
and Councillor Cuthbert,
Happy to proceed.
and I'm happy to proceed. So, Councillor Massey, if you could start us on this one.
Yes, thank you, convener. Although this development is of modest size, it is against various policies in the LDP2 and NPF4, and I am going to dismiss the appeal on the grounds that are stated number 1, 2 and 3. I believe Mr. Elliott may tell us that 4 may be included, but definitely for 1, 2 and 3. So I dismiss the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come in next, if I may. I've visited the site on two occasions, once on the original and obviously just last week. It is obviously outside of the settlement, but just abuts to it. And I think, having looked at the site, I can see how the house would fit in into that site. I can see how it would work quite well with the houses beside it. It's in a situation where, by allowing this, you're not going to open a door for further development. The tree line will stop any further development really there, and obviously the 827 is just literally on the other side of the trees. So this would be a one-off really for a departure. I think the house would look in place to be part of the settlement, or it is outside it as it stands. It's a minor departure from the LDP in this occasion, minor departure from policy, but I think there's enough grounds to allow for that. And on this occasion, taking into account also the fact, and I know it's 17 years ago, the other house at the back was granted on appeal to the DPEA. It is 17 years ago, I accept, but nonetheless, it is in the back of mind. I feel there's enough here for a minor departure from policy, simply because there can be no expansion of properties here. I feel, therefore, I'm prepared to grant the appeal. There are a few conditions perhaps to go on. I know we've had a standard condition for contamination and noise. There may be need for some conditions regarding trees, but we'll come back to that later on. Perhaps we'll wait for Councillor Cuthbert because he now has the desired vote.
Thank you, convener. I was hoping I wouldn't be in this position because I find this quite difficult because the site, as you say, it's quite an obvious site for a house, but it sits out with the settlement boundary, and we do have rules, as Councillor Massey said, about not building out with the settlement boundary. I think the point you've made about the trees and therefore stopping any further development that side, I think I will side with you and approve the appeal on the basis that it's a limited size location and it's not going to go any further. So I would approve the appeal.
Thank you. That's a Mr. Elliott. We have a majority decision again. It's an interesting day today. A 2-1 decision to approve the appeal. I did mention some conditions. I think this was really to do with the trees, and I'm hoping Councillor Cuthbert would agree. But it's to do with obviously tree retention, the protection of those trees, compensatory planting as well, and I think also perhaps an action plan to review the trees on a regular basis for future owners.
Yes, convener. By majority, yes, grant 2-1. Just to digress slightly on to Councillor Massey's reasons for refusal. Yes, if you're satisfied with the information provided on trees, it will be refusal on grounds 1 and 2 and 3 per the original refusal notice. In terms of grant, that we grant subject to suitable terms, conditions and informatives. I'll come back to the conditions in a second, but I think the justification, minor departure, the landscape framework did not create a precedent for the future. He also mentioned that it's got the appearance of being part of the settlement. And you also gave weight to the, I think it was 2007 appeal decision, but I think it would be more the reasoning within the appeal decision.
Right. You put it so much better, Mr. Elliott.
Yes. Well, but in terms of conditions, obviously, Mrs. Tierney may have views, but I think from what I heard, I think, you know, of course, you've mentioned trees.
Mhm.
I think actually, convener, you were talking first of all about the retention of the trees. I know there's 1 or 2 to come down,
Yes.
but the ones that are to be retained would be conditioned to be retained. Obviously there is a standard condition for protection during construction.
Yes, which the bits have shown can be done.
Compensatory planting.
Yes.
Now, often that is anything fails within 5 years gets renewed, but I think you talked about a specific review of it as well.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned contaminated land. I think it's mentioned in the reports, contaminated land, noise.
And noise.
And there was also mention, I did hear about reducing a fence down to the height for the visibility display. But I really should hand over to Mrs. Tierney.
I think that's already been done actually when I went down last week. No, it's not. Yeah.
Okay.
Fine. Thank you very much. So members, that now leads us on to the last application of the day. I'm going to close this folder up because that's not part of it. But this is. So we're now on item 5.2, which is, read this through, mixed use development comprising alterations to church, relocation of memorial, erection of community centre with sport education facilities, offices, community cafe, formation of replacement mugger, landscaping, parking, associated works, land 30 metres west of St Columba's Episcopal Church and 19 Perth Road in Stanley. This is a case that was deferred previously, now come back. Mrs. Tierney, if you'd like to introduce that for us.
Thank you, convener. Again, I think that the members present today are different to those when the appeal was deferred. So I'll just take some time to go through the case again and then provide you with the information which has been received since the deferral. So in terms of just some of the slides we've got here, the location of the application site to the west of Perth Road there, indicated with the yellow star. And then we have the proposed development area. So that's all contained within the red line that you see. Obviously, there's lots of development roundabout here in terms of the bowling green, the existing church and war memorial there at the front. But then as you come through the site to where the new proposed extension would be, where the existing hall building at the rear of the church is proposed to be removed, and then the Mugget area there to the rear of the bowling green. Next slide, please. And then just coming in a bit more closely to the front of the site, the site plan here, the building to the rear of the existing church, and the war memorial with the access of the main road there, some disabled parking at the front of the property, and then an access into the building. Next slide, please. We've got some artist's impressions here of 3D images, if you like, of the proposal. So the one at the top there from the road, looking towards the development. So on the left-hand side there, the existing church building, and then the war memorial with the new building to the rear there behind the two trees. And then the bottom image there is looking from the back of the site, back of the proposed new building towards the road. Next slide, please. This is again the rear of the building, so you can see the church, the existing church building popping up there. So that's the image that you see looking towards the road. Next slide, please. A couple of side elevations here for you. So the one on the top there is West Park, a small, a few houses there that are accessed off that road. It only leads to those houses. You can see the church on the left-hand side there, and the extension, or the new building, I should say, to the rear. And then the other elevation, looking from the existing bowling green to the side elevation of the church, and the proposed new building to the rear there. Next slide, please. Again, an artist's impression of the front entrance to the property, the church building there on the left-hand side, and then you can see the majority of that building there, single story, with that proposed two-story element in the middle for the internal games area. Next slide, please. So these are photographs of the site itself. So again, from the main road looking across to the war memorial and the church. Next slide, please. And then coming in more closely to the front of the site here, where the access to the property would come by removal of part of the railings and wall at the front there of the war memorial. Next slide, please. Again, just coming slightly further down the road there, where you can see the section of wall and railings that would be moved there. Again, this is the front of the church building. You can see the area to the rear, which is the whole element of the church that would be removed, just coming out to the rear there. Next slide, please. And again, one of the front elevation of the property and the boundary between the church and the war memorial at the moment. Next slide, please. This is the area of wall and railings that would be removed to accommodate the access. Next slide, please. And this is the war memorial area to the front, the church, and then the hall building to the rear of the existing church, which the proposal includes the removal of. Next slide, please. Just a close-up image of the memorial. A slightly closer image now of the elevation of the church and the hall building that's attached to the rear of that. Next slide, please. And again, another image there of that side of the church and the hall building at the rear. And then this is the you can just see the whole building there popping up behind that tree in the middle of the slide there, and the kind of overgrown old tennis courts at the side. Next slide, please. And again, that kind of overgrown area. Next slide, please. And this is looking back towards the main road from West Park. You can see the church building on the far right there. Next slide, please. And again, this is the church and the whole building at the rear. Next slide, please. And again, you can see the boundary of that kind of overgrown area there at the back, and the whole building to the rear of the church. And then this is looking over from the play park to the rear, looking back towards the application site where there's that growth, that regrowth area. Next slide, please. And again, looking back towards the bowling green, over the boundary from the play park there. Next slide, please. And again, as you move further around. Next slide, please. And then the boundary of the play park area there, looking into the back of where the development would come out towards the pitch areas, the Muga areas. Next slide, please. This is the bowling green to the south side of the development. So you can see the bowling green area there, and then you can see that side elevation of the whole building at the back of the church, overlooking the bowling green. Next slide, please. And then looking at that elevation a bit more closely, the whole building at the rear there attached to the church. Next slide, please. And then from the back of the bowling green, looking towards the whole building at the back of the church. And then a more distant view there again. So you can see the whole building would come down at the back of the church, and that area behind the hedging there would be where you would see the new building. Next slide, please. And a slightly closer up image of that. So in terms of a wider introduction again and background to the appeal, the site is located on the west side of Perth Road, and the proposal involves the demolition of the church hall to the rear of St Columba's Church to accommodate the development. The church dates from 1898 and comprises the rectangular plan timber church with gable fronting onto Perth Road, and the rectangular church hall to the rear dating back to 1907. While initial plans involved the removal and relocation of the war memorial at the front of the church to accommodate a car park, the plans were altered, showing the retention of the war memorial. However, some of the listed walls and fencing to the front would still require to be removed to gain access into the development. The community centre building is to sit behind and to the west of the church and war memorial, and is bound by Bowling Green to the south, playing fields and children's play park to the west, and 3 dwelling houses at West Park to the north. The site of the community centre is currently occupied by 2 derelict tennis courts, which would be replaced with the Muga, which is to be located to the southwest of the community centre building within the existing playing fields. The community centre building is proposed to have a square footprint with a small projection on the east elevation to accommodate the entrance area and offices, and which will sit directly behind the church. The site of the rest of the building is an area of ground occupied by the former village tennis courts. The building has been laid out so that the largest space, the main hall, is in the middle, and the height of this part of the building at 9 metres is dictated by the sporting activity which will take place within the hall. The remainder of the building is 4.3 metres high. The community centre is proposed to provide a single building to provide a variety of flexible and accessible spaces to support community life. The supporting statement indicates that the development will be providing a civic presence at the heart of the village that is open and welcoming. The accommodation is to meet contemporary expectation for public facilities and be capable through the range and arrangement of spaces of providing for all manner of community interaction and activity. This means that any one time there can be sporting activity taking place alongside social activity. The building is to be open to all members of the community, becoming a destination for existing and new clubs, associations and groups. This includes the adjacent bowling club, football team, former tennis club and the current activities taking place in the town hall. So the reasons for refusal, it stated that the proposed scale, mass and location of the community centre is considered to have a significant detrimental impact on the setting of the Category C listed St Columba's Episcopal Church and the Category C listed Stanley War Memorial, and will form a prominent backdrop to key views of the listed structures from the street to their detriment. The proposal is therefore contrary to MPF 4 Policy 7C, Historic Assets and Places, and Policy 28A of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2019, which seeks to preserve the character, special architectural or historic interest and setting of listed buildings. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the principle of such a facility is supported, including by policies governing community facilities and wealth building and 20-minute neighbourhoods. Although the land is designated as open space in the LDP, the formation of a community centre is considered to be directly linked to the use of the open space. And while the community centre building is being located on the site of the 2 existing tennis courts, these are replaced by the proposed Muga area to the southwest. It is the particular impact of the whole development on the original church building and the War Memorial, which is considered unacceptable in terms of Historic Environment Scotland guidance, MPF 4 and LDP policy. While retention of the War Memorial is welcome, the amendments and additional information submitted do not adequately address the concerns raised by the proposals in relation to the adverse impact on listed buildings. The proposed community centre is in very close proximity to the church and War Memorial and would form a prominent backdrop to key views of the listed buildings from the east. The community centre is only 3.2 metres from the rear of the church at its closest point. The hall for the community centre is proposed to extend to 9 metres in height, which is substantially higher than any building in the immediate vicinity. The church building is only 7 metres in height. The proposed hall for the community centre will therefore completely dominate the church building and the adjacent War Memorial. The church and War Memorial currently benefit of a natural backdrop containing trees and planting associated with the open space to the west. This would be entirely lost as a result of the proposal, with a 30-metre length of the eastern elevation of the community centre becoming the backdrop to the listed buildings. Given the scale of this elevation and the height of the hall, the building would become the dominant feature in this view, and the adverse visual impact resulting from the loss of the church hall and the scale of the new development would be significant. In terms of the applicant's case, the applicant disagrees that the visual impact will be negative, as stated in their heritage assessment, which recognises that the greatest degree of change is when viewing the site from Perth Road, but that despite the development being visible, its design and materials will have no meaningful effect upon the ability to understand and appreciate the existing church and War Memorial. The assessment also notes that the hall is in a poor state of repair and is of limited architectural interest, and that the alterations to the pier and boundary wall and railing will not result in any harm to the significance of the setting of the War Memorial. In terms of the impact of the building, this is positioned to the rear of the church and is predominantly single-storey, with a central 2-storey hall element. The building is of a contemporary, lightweight design, and the taller elements will have opaque glazing. While the surroundings will undoubtedly change as a result of the development, it will not have a substantive effect upon the ability to experience, understand or appreciate those elements of the building's setting which contribute to its significant and special interest. The removal of the hall will return the church to its original simple form and appearance. In terms of other matters, there was a total of 228 representations, including 21 objections and 207 letters of support. The comments made in the letters of objection include adverse effect on visual amenity, scale and height, inadequate design, inappropriate land use, lack or loss of car parking, light pollution, loss of open space, noise pollution, out of character with the area, over-intensive development, overlooking, road safety, traffic congestion, removal of the War Memorial, impact on setting of the church and War Memorial, demolition of the church hall is not justified, it's contrary to the development plan, title deed and land ownership restrictions, antisocial behaviour, opening hours, lack of public consultation and impact on biodiversity. The comments made in the letters of support include that it enhances the character of the area, it supports economic development, it provides community space for the village, it improves availability of sports facilities for clubs and community groups, it is needed in the village, it provides employment, it supports a growing population and new housing development, and it addresses the lack of community provision in Stanley. The Council's Conservation Officer and Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust have both objected to the application. There are no objections from Rhodes given the central and accessible location of the development. So when the application appeal was deferred previously, further to that, that was pending the outcome of the two separate listed building consent appeals which have been made to the Scottish Government DPA. And in terms of an update on those, with regard to the first appeal for the alterations to the pier and the boundary wall at the War Memorial, the reporter stated that the works would result in the southernmost pier being relocated around 1.2 metres further north, a short section of the boundary wall of around 70 centimetres, and the associated railings between the current and proposed location of the pier would be lost. I do not consider that there is anything remarkable about either the wall or the railings. They make a limited contribution to the building's special historic interest. Accordingly, the loss of the fabric would not be significant and its special historic interest would be preserved. As such, the appeal was upheld and consent was granted. With regard to the second appeal for the demolition of the church hall, the reporter concluded, amongst other discussion, that the demolition would be required to redevelop an area to the west of the church, including the land on which the church hall is constructed, as a community sports hub. The appellant states that the hall cannot be meaningfully incorporated into the development proposals and is not suitable for reuse as part of the development. While I accept it's likely to be the case and that the development would provide benefits to the wider community, I'm not persuaded that but for the demolition of the listed building, the community benefits could not be delivered, particularly given the extent of the overall development site. As such, the appeal was dismissed and consent was not granted. The Planning Authority has then commented that as a result of the dismissed appeal for the demolition of the hall building, that it would not be possible to develop the community centre as is currently proposed. The agent has also further commented that the local review body has been asked to review the decision taken by officers to refuse planning permission for a single multi-use building with outside multi-use games area, pedestrian vehicular access and accessible car parking. This community facility is much needed in Stanley and has the support of local people. In coming to its own views on the proposed demolition of the church hall, the LRB is not bound by the decision taken in the listed building appeal. The appellant considers that the LRB, in exercising its legal right as decision maker, has a number of propositions to consider on the matter of demolition. This includes that if ecclesiastical exemption is applied, then listed building consent is not required, and that a grant of planning permission would be sufficient to allow the proposed development to commence. That if the hall is not considered part of the listed building, then listed building consent is not required, and a grant of planning permission would be sufficient to allow the proposed development to commence. And that if the LRB considered that demolition was justified as part of this wider application for full planning permission, Stanley Development Trust would reapply for listed building consent. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to questions, Councillor.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I was just looking for clarification on what you just said, really. I presume what you're saying is that we can make a decision, but we can only make the decision on the basis of this application that's before us. And were we minded to grant it, then it would be up to the developer to look for consent to demolish the church hall. Is that correct?
Yes, Councillor. So two processes in effect. The application before you is for full planning permission for the development, and that includes the demolition of the hall. the separate listed building consent application was for the demolition of the whole building. The listed building consent for the demolition of the hall has been dismissed by the Scottish Government reporter. So that does, it is something for you to consider, because obviously it's entirely relevant to the proposal in front of you, but this is a separate application for full planning permission. And you can make whatever decision you see fit in terms of the merits of this application as a standalone application. If the LRB is minded to approve this application and grant permission, the applicant would be able to reapply for listed building consent and go through due process to have that considered once again.
Councillor Massey.
And this might be out of the scope of your remit, but is it possible to have a building or part of a building delisted?
Yes, Councillor. Historic Environment Scotland have a process whereby people can apply to have their building delisted. It's actually quite a simple process. It's an application form. I mean, obviously, you would need to provide a certain amount of information as to why you think the building should be delisted, but yes, it is a process.
Okay, thank you. So we don't appear to have any further questions. So members, are we now in a position to proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? Is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Massey.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Cuthbert, if you could start us off on this one.
I get the short straw. Yes, I've gone through all the paperwork, well, the great majority of the paperwork. I visited the site, and my view on this is that where Kinross, which is in my ward, offered such a facility, they would take your arm off for it. I think looking at what's proposed is fantastic. I think there are very wide community benefits, which I'm slightly surprised that hasn't been taken into account by the DPEA. But in principle, my view is that the wide community benefits make this worth approving. So I would uphold the appeal on this occasion.
Councillor Massey.
I agree with that. I think the community benefit overrides the development plan. It has a huge support within the community. So I would agree with Councillor Cuthbert on this matter.
Thank you, members. So my view is obviously going to be academic there anyway. So there is absolutely no doubt that there is a need for the community hub in Stanley. The letters of support which we've had and we've all seen make that quite clear. It's well supported, and indeed the report of handling actually says within it there is a desire for a community hub within Stanley. The comments of the planning officer following the decision, he quite clearly says, and I'm going to quote, "As listed building consent for the demolition of the church hall has been refused, it is not possible to develop the community centre as is currently proposed." Don't want to get into criticising the reporters, but having been to the site twice and looked at it from as many angles as I possibly could, I agree wholeheartedly that there is a need for a community hub and a community centre within Stanley, particularly with the ongoing development of the area. My concern more rather than the church hall was the War Memorial itself. A War Memorial is there for a reason. And whilst I don't think there's any problems in moving the wall to allow vehicular access, it is important how the War Memorial looks and how it stands. I've got no problems with the materials being used in the construction of the hub. My concern is the way the War Memorial is presented afterwards, and I feel, on balance, having been twice and looked from all angles, my thoughts are that the construction overwhelms it. I think the massing is too much, and therefore I, to some extent reluctantly, would refuse the appeal. I think war memorials are important for obvious reasons. And I think, having looked at the drawings as it would look, I think it would just overwhelm the site of the war memorial, in my opinion. And I appreciate I'm in the minority now, but that's my thought, and I have to say it as it is. So reluctantly, I would refuse the appeal on those grounds. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a majority ruling again, which is quite unusual today, the way it's gone.
Yes, Convener, yes, 2-1 to Grant, obviously yourself looking to refuse in line with the officer's report. It's Grant subject to suitable terms, conditions and informatives. I didn't hear anything in main specifics, so officers will drop the conditions. Justification, what I heard was really, I think it's an acceptance that it may be contrary to policy, however, there are other material considerations, namely the provision of much needed community facilities. Yes.
That brings us to the end of today's meeting. Thank you very much, members. An interesting one today, the way it's gone. But thank you both. Thank you, obviously, for the officers with us today, and thank you, Mr. Tierney, for your presence. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much.